What happens when one of television's biggest legends walks straight into the most brutal interview of his career? What started as an ordinary studio visit quickly turned into live TV chaos, the likes of which no one, least of all Steve Harvey, could have predicted. He arrived expecting a friendly exchange, a light-hearted conversation, where charm and wit ruled. The set of The View had always been familiar ground, a place of smiles and safe questions. But that day, everything changed. What unfolded on camera was nothing short of a televised ambush, a confrontation so intense it sent shockwaves across the nation, leaving audiences talking for weeks. Before we dive into this explosive encounter, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Which talk show host do you think dominates on-screen conflict? By the time the story ends, your view of the polished world of daytime TV will never be the same. It wasn't just an interview gone wrong, it was a high-stakes display of psychological maneuvering, raw ego, and the unpredictable danger of live television. It all began on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Steve Harvey walked onto the set wearing his signature confident smile, the one that had made him a household name. His navy suit and patterned tie were the perfect armor of sophistication and charisma. With a casual tug of his jacket, he owned the moment like a king entering his court. The audience erupted into thunderous applause, their energy bouncing off the stage lights and camera lenses. This was his element, the space where millions had come to adore him over decades. The host greeted him warmly. Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, and Sunny Host radiated friendliness and camaraderie, signaling the promise of a smooth conversation. Whoopi, ever the master of live TV, leaned in with a blend of authority and warmth, ready to guide the dialogue. But at the far edge of the table, Joy Behar sat like a coiled spring, arms crossed and body angled defensively, a predator sizing up its prey. While everyone else beamed, her icy, calculating gaze sent a clear signal. This would not be easy. Steve, trained by years under the spotlight, sensed the tension immediately. He recognized the warning signs but chose to push them aside, assuming the usual jitters of a live show. "Steve Harvey, everyone!" Whoopi's voice boomed as applause surged. "We're thrilled to have you today." Steve responded with his million-dollar grin, charming and effortless. "Always a pleasure to be here with you ladies," he said. Sarah Haynes opened the first question, warm and inviting. "Steve, your new book on relationships is already a hit. What inspired you to write another guide for couples?" Steve leaned forward, elbows on knees, ready to shine. This was his domain, mixing humor with heartfelt advice, the type of wisdom his audience craved. "Well, Sarah," he began, voice steady and confident, the perfect start to a performance that would soon spiral into the unexpected. After decades of hosting Family Feud and connecting with thousands of families, I've learned one thing above all: communication is everything, Steve Harvey began, weaving a tapestry of stories about couples at every stage. Newlyweds, longtime partners, those on the brink of breaking, and even those who had lost the words to speak to each other. He shared humor, heartbreak, and hard-earned truths, captivating the audience entirely. Heads nodded in agreement, smiles bloomed, and the room seemed to hang on every word. But then the camera shifted almost imperceptibly to Joy Behar. She wasn't nodding, she wasn't smiling. She didn't feign interest. Her gaze was razor sharp, her posture a taut coil. Every ounce of her presence radiated calculation, a quiet intensity that promised an incoming storm. Steve, seasoned and intuitive, sensed the tension, though he tried to dismiss it, believing in the familiar rhythm of live conversation. When couples stop really listening to each other, that's when the problems begin, Steve said, his voice smooth and steady, a master at commanding attention. The audience murmured approval, the classic Steve Harvey charm filling the room. Sunny smiled, supportive. Sarah added praise about his book's glowing reviews. But Joy's eyes didn't soften. Her body leaned forward slightly, a subtle shift that hinted at confrontation. Joy, you look like you have something to say, Steve teased lightly, attempting to keep the atmosphere breezy. But her eyes narrowed fractionally, a small, deadly shift. Well, Steve, she said slowly, deliberately, I've been reading your book, and I have to ask, don't you think it's a little hypocritical for someone who's been married 3 times to give relationship advice? The studio seemed to freeze. Laughter vanished. The background chatter disappeared. Even the air seemed to chill. Sonny's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. Sarah's warm smile froze into shock. Whoopi's eyes widened, the unmistakable look of a host realizing the line had just been crossed. For a split second, Steve's signature $1,000,000 smile wavered, a crack in the armor, raw and human. But he recovered, voice calm and deliberate. Joy, he said, I think my experiences, both good and challenging, actually give me insight into what works and what doesn't. Every relationship teaches something. He pressed his hands together on the table as if bracing against the storm brewing across from him. Joy, however, was not interested in lessons. She was there to press, to provoke. Leaning in, she continued, her tone sharp. You've publicly spoken about your first 2 marriages ending in divorce. How can you sit here and tell others how to make their marriages work when you couldn't make yours work? Whoopi moved quickly, trying to calm the rising tension. Joy, I think what Steve is saying is... But Joy cut her off, a raised hand silencing the room. Let him answer, she said. The stage was set. The challenge was laid bare. And in that moment, one of television's most unflappable stars faced a confrontation that would be replayed, debated, and dissected for years to come. A collective gasp swept through the stunned audience, a ripple of shock that seemed to freeze the studio in place. Behind the cameras, producers were paralyzed, unsure how to intervene. Joy Behar's voice cut through the tension, sharp and accusatory. I think our viewers deserve to know why they should take relationship advice from someone with such a track record, she pressed. Steve Harvey inhaled slowly, his jaw tightening, not in anger, but with the monumental effort of a man containing a hurricane. Even under this relentless onslaught, he remained the consummate professional. Well, he began, voice steady but now carrying a weight and a hard edge, a signal that the game had changed. Joy's eyes didn't waver. Her posture was a fortress of scrutiny. I'm not sure what you're trying to get at here, he stated calmly, locking his gaze with hers in silent declaration. But I've been happily married to my wife, Marjorie, for over 15 years. We have a beautiful blended family, and yes, I've learned from my past mistakes. That's what growth looks like. Joy's laughter was sharp, almost surgical, slicing through the studio air. Growth? She echoed, dripping with skepticism. Or is it just good marketing? A collective murmur moved through the crowd. Her arms folded into a smug, impenetrable wall. I mean, how convenient, she pressed, that your personal struggles become best-selling books. The audience's discomfort was palpable. Sarah covered her mouth in mortification. Sonny looked ready to leap across the table. Even the unflappable Whoopi shifted uneasily, signaling that the tension had gone beyond control. Joy wasn't finished. Her voice dropped into an icy, deliberate chill. And another thing, Steve, she said. Those comedy specials from the 90s, some of that material about women, it hasn't aged well, has it? So how can anyone trust that your advice isn't the same outdated thinking? Steve placed his coffee mug on the table, a muted but undeniable thud echoing through the studio, a subtle warning amplified by the microphones. His patience, stretched thin, was beginning to fray. Joy, he said, turning to face her fully, his body language a wall of unshakable defiance. I came here to talk about helping people build stronger relationships, not to be put on trial for jokes I made decades ago as a comedian. His voice remained calm, but it was laced with steel, drawing a line in the sand. Comedy evolves, people evolve, and I think my track record speaks for itself. A few audience members dared tentative applause, careful not to disrupt the spell of tension. Others simply stared, wide-eyed, witnessing raw, unfiltered intensity. This was no longer a lighthearted disagreement. It wasn't even a debate. It was Joy Behar conducting a full-scale interrogation on live television, and Steve Harvey refusing to be broken. The studio air was a powder keg, crackling with suspense. And then Joy struck again, her words like a razor slicing through every ounce of calm. Because from where I'm sitting, Steve, it looks a whole lot like you're profiting from giving advice on something you've struggled with your entire life. A low, ominous murmur rolled through the audience. The blow hit Steve visibly, forcing him to blink, stunned by the direct, piercing accusation. He opened his mouth to respond, but Joy pressed forward, relentless, unyielding, each word designed to challenge, provoke, and dominate. The live audience could feel the weight of the confrontation, a tension so raw it seemed almost tangible, hanging heavy over every face in the room. And frankly, she added, emphasizing the word like a deliberate twist of the knife, some of your past comments about women, comments you made willingly, suggest you might not be the best person to tell them how to find love. The room went ice cold. Sonny's jaw hung open in disbelief. Sarah looked as if she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Even Whoopi Goldberg, a veteran of more on-air chaos than anyone in daytime TV, seemed momentarily stunned by how far Joy was willing to push. Leaning in, Whoopi tried to steer the conversation back. Maybe we should talk about the positive feedback the book has received, she offered, a desperate attempt at control. No, Whoopi, Steve said, his calm now a thin veneer over something harder, sharper, a signal that he had reached his limit. He pivoted fully toward Joy, locking eyes with her. Joy wants to have this conversation, he said, voice low and steady. So let's have it, Joy. The studio air thickened, crackling with tension. You're sitting here, Steve continued, his tone measured but powerful, trying to tear me down in front of millions of viewers. And for what? What's your agenda here? Joy leaned back, a slow, satisfied smirk spreading across her face as if she had just checkmated him. My agenda is truth, Steve, she replied smugly. I think our viewers deserve to know who they're taking advice from. Tilting her head condescendingly, she added, and honestly, your defensive reaction is pretty telling. That was the spark that lit the fuse. Steve's eyes narrowed, his posture snapping ramrod straight. Defensive? He repeated, voice swelling with controlled power. You're attacking my character, my marriage, my career, and you expect me to sit here and just smile and nod? That's not happening, ladies and gentlemen. He pivoted slightly toward the audience, bringing them into the arena. But Joy was far from finished. Steve Harvey, everyone, she announced with dripping sarcasm, gesturing toward him like a ringmaster presenting a failed circus act. This is what happens when you ask legitimate questions. He falls apart. The sharp scrape of Steve's chair against the studio floor was like a gunshot. He was on his feet. The sudden movement jolted everyone on set. Sarah gasped audibly. Sonny instinctively reached out as if to pull him back. Whoopi's eyes darted to the frozen production crew. Steve planted both hands firmly on the table, leaning toward Joy, not with menace, but with unshakable authority. I'm not falling apart, Joy, he said, voice low, resonant, commanding. I'm calling out your unprofessional behavior. He paused, letting the words hang in the stunned, silent studio air. This isn't journalism, he continued, each word deliberate. This is you trying to create a moment. Joy raised her eyebrows, feigning amusement, but for the first time, her smirk wavered, a tiny crack in the facade. Steve had struck back harder than she anticipated. The tension had escalated to a level rarely seen on daytime television. Across the country, viewers leaned closer to their screens. In the studio, the live audience held a collective breath, caught between witnessing an explosive moment and the potential collapse of the interview. Steve Harvey, the master of calm humor, was now standing his ground with a fire no one saw coming, but everyone would be talking about. What happened next would determine whether this segment became a mere footnote or one of the most infamous on-air blow-ups in talk show history. "This is character assassination," Steve declared, his voice cutting through the silent studio like a crack of thunder. The room was so still you could hear the hum of the studio lights overhead. Audience members covered their mouths, eyes wide with disbelief. Some leaned forward, terrified to blink and miss a single second. Others looked genuinely distressed. This wasn't the lighthearted television they had expected. It had devolved into something raw, uncomfortable, and intensely personal. At the table, the other co-hosts were paralyzed. Sunny shot a nervous glance at Whoopi. Sarah clutched her note card so tightly her knuckles whitened. No one knew the right move. Joy Behar's voice sliced through the tension. "Sit down, Steve," she commanded, sharp, an attempt to reassert dominance. "You're embarrassing yourself." "I'm embarrassing myself." Steve's short, bitter laugh carried more hurt than humor. "Joy, you've spent the last 10 minutes trying to humiliate me on national television, and you think I'm the one embarrassed?" He gestured to the audience, then locked eyes back on her. "You know what's embarrassing? A grown woman who thinks bullying is good television." Joy's face flushed deep red. "Bullying? I'm asking legitimate questions," she snapped. "Questions any responsible journalist would ask. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be on talk shows." "Legitimate questions?" Steve's voice rose, disbelief etched on his face. "Joy, you started this interview with an attack. You didn't ask about my book. You didn't ask about my family. You didn't ask about my work, my philanthropy, nothing. You went straight for the throat the moment I sat down. That's not journalism. That's a hit job." "Oh, please," Joy scoffed, rolling her eyes. "You're being dramatic. This is how interviews work in the real world, Steve. We don't just throw you softball questions so you can promote your book." Steve's composure finally began to fracture. He pointed a finger directly at her. "Joy, I've done thousands of interviews in my career. I've graced every major network, every flagship program. I recognize the difference between a challenging question and a targeted takedown. What you're orchestrating falls squarely into the second category." From the stunned silence, Whoopi finally spoke, raising her hands as if to plate a force of nature. "Perhaps we should cut to a commercial." "No," Steve interjected, his words slicing through her attempt. "Joy ignited this, and we will extinguish it here, now." A wave of disbelief washed over the studio. No one, not the seasoned hosts, not the captive audience, was prepared for a guest to seize control of a live broadcast. Joy's arms folded across her chest, a shield of defiance. She leaned forward, eyes locking onto his like a predator. "Fine, Steve. Let's see this through. You want to speak of personal assaults? Let's talk about you." Her finger jabbed the air like a weapon. "Let's dissect the empire you built on the backs of female caricatures, on laughter aimed at them, on reducing them to simplistic punchlines. And now you dare to reinvent yourself as some sage of relationships." A harsh, derisive scoff escaped her lips. The audacity was breathtaking. At his sides, Steve's hands clenched into tight fists. Not in threat, but in a desperate bid to contain the storm of anger, hurt, and sheer bewilderment raging within him. The studio had become a battlefield, every word a live wire of tension, every glance a calculated move in a war of wills that would be remembered for years. "Joy," Steve began, voice low, a strained appeal for reason. "You clearly harbor some deep-seated grievance against me because this degree of animosity, this is not standard procedure." His hands opened in a gesture of raw confusion. "Did I slight you in some forgotten moment? Did a careless word at some industry gala wound you? because this feels intensely personal. Don't flatter yourself, she snapped, the word cracking like ice. This has nothing to do with you personally. This is a matter of public reckoning. Accountability, Steve echoed, the word tasting bitter on his tongue. You cannot simply erase your history. Joy pressed on, relentless. And demand we all suffer from amnesia? Steve's voice fractured, not from weakness, but from the staggering weight of her cruelty. He took a half step back, drawing a breath that seemed to pull all the oxygen from the room. Joy. My past is sleeping in a car because I had no home. My past is working every menial job imaginable just to eat. My past is clawing my way up from absolute zero to create an enterprise that supports hundreds of families. His voice swelled with truth and conviction. My past is pouring millions into charitable causes, guiding the next generation of comics, lifting up children who were dealt an impossible hand. He gestured to the silent audience. But you want to crucify me for punchlines I delivered 30 years ago. Joy dismissed his life's work with a flick of her wrist, as if shooing away an insect. Oh, spare us the melodrama. Steve, countless people have overcome hardship, she said, dripping with condescension. But they haven't built a career on demeaning women. A heavy silence descended upon the set. Into the void, Sarah finally spoke, her voice a fragile, trembling thread of sanity. Joy, I believe we might be crossing a line. But it was too late. The boundary had been shattered. The confrontation had cemented its place as one of the most volatile exchanges in daytime television history, and the storm had only just begun. This is a public dismantling of a man's character, Steve declared, his voice echoing through the studio like thunder. The air grew thick, almost tangible, the hum of the lights overhead suffused with tension. Audience members shielded their mouths, eyes wide with shock. Some leaned forward, prisoners of the spectacle, terrified to miss a single second. Others looked genuinely pained. This was no breezy morning chat. It had spiraled into something visceral, raw, and intensely personal. At the host's table, the co-hosts were frozen. Sunny shot a panicked glance at Whoopi. Sarah's knuckles whitened as she gripped her note cards. The rules of engagement had vanished. Sit down, Steve, Joy commanded sharply, her voice a whip cracking through the tension. You're making a spectacle of yourself. I'm making a spectacle. A bitter, hollow laugh escaped Steve's lips, more pain than humor. Joy, you've spent the last 10 minutes attempting my public humiliation, and you have the audacity to claim I'm causing a scene? His arms swept toward the stunned audience, then snapped back, pointing directly at her. Do you want to know what's truly a spectacle? A grown woman who mistakes cruelty for compelling television. Joy's face ignited a furious crimson. Cruelty, she seethed. I am posing legitimate questions, Joy said, her voice icy and precise. Questions any credible journalist would be obligated to ask. If you are incapable of handling them, perhaps you should avoid the talk show circuit entirely. Legitimate questions? Steve's voice rose, a crescendo of disbelief. Joy, you opened this segment with a full frontal assault. You didn't ask about my new book. You didn't ask about my children. You didn't ask about my charitable work. Nothing. You came for the jugular the second my shoes touched this stage. He shook his head, bewilderment etched into every line of his face. That isn't journalism. That's a premeditated takedown. Oh, please, Joy scoffed, rolling her eyes theatrically. You're being overly dramatic. This is how interviews work in the big leagues, Steve. We don't just serve up easy pitches so you can hawk your latest project. Steve's finger leveled at her, his composure beginning to crack under the pressure. Joy, I've sat through thousands of interviews in my career. I've been on every major network, every flagship program. I know the difference between tough questions and personal attacks. He jabbed a finger toward the table. And what you're doing is the latter. Finally, Whoopi found her voice, raising her hand slightly as though trying to calm a storm. Maybe we should take a commercial break. No, Steve cut in sharply, his words slicing through the tension. Joy started this, and we're going to finish it right here, right now. A ripple of astonishment moved through the studio. No one, neither the host nor the audience, was prepared for Steve Harvey to refuse a commercial break. Joy crossed her arms, leaning back in her chair, a taunting smirk on her face. Fine, Steve, let's finish this. She leaned forward, eyes locking onto his like a predator. You want to talk about personal attacks? Let's talk about you. She jabbed her finger toward him. Let's talk about how you've made a career out of stereotyping women, laughing at them, simplifying them, and now you're trying to rebrand yourself as a relationship guru. The hypocrisy is stunning. Steve's hands curled into fists at his sides, not raised, not threatening, but tight with emotion, hurt, and disbelief. Joy, he said slowly, almost pleading for reason. You clearly have a personal issue with me because this level of hostility, this isn't normal. He spread his hands in confusion. Did I offend you somehow? Did I hurt your feelings at some industry event? Because this feels personal. Don't flatter yourself, Joy shot back instantly, her tone icy. This isn't personal. This is about accountability. Accountability? Steve echoed incredulously. You can't just reinvent yourself. And expect everyone to forget your past? Joy interjected. My past, Steve said, his voice cracking. Not from weakness, but from the shock of how far she was willing to go. He stepped back slightly, drawing a deep breath. Joy, my past includes growing up homeless, sleeping in my car, working every job I could just to survive. My past includes grinding my way from nothing to building a media empire that employs hundreds of people. His voice gained power with every word. My past includes giving millions to charity, mentoring young comedians, helping kids who didn't have a chance. He pointed to the audience. But you want to focus on jokes I told 30 years ago. Joy waved her hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. Oh, here comes the sob story? Gasps rippled through the audience. Steve, plenty of people overcome adversity, she said, without making degrading comments about women along the way. A heavy silence fell across the table. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice fragile but sincere. Joy, I think maybe we're going too far. But it was too late. The line had been crossed. The confrontation had officially become one of the most explosive moments in daytime television history.